Hi, welcome to Youth Engage. I'm Brian Brady, and I'm alongside my co-host Antoine Ward and producer. How's it going, Antoine?
We're good, man. I'm excited. Always new opportunities. Always enjoy working with you. So let's have some fun today.
Yeah, we have two amazing guests from Anaheim, California. The Chicagoans interviewing two amazing Anaheim leaders, and we're going to dive in today to a really amazing historical moment and a response by these two leaders from 10 years ago, because it's the 10-year anniversary. So first, let me introduce my guest, former mayor of Anaheim, Tom Tait. He was mayor for 8 years, and I believe you were a city council member for 10 years before that, Tom.
Right.
And you are nationally known, internationally known as the kindness mayor, because you made kindness and acts of kindness key to all that you do in building a campaign around that. Many other accomplishments too. And we also have the great Superintendent Michael Matsuda with us, who's a personal friend who I interviewed a month ago. It was a great interview on his innovative work in Anaheim, building an ecosystem of learning and career preparedness so that young people who graduate from Anaheim High School can go right into the workforce if they want to, and well-paying jobs, or go off to college and are extremely prepared. So two of the best leaders in the country, in my mind, we get to talk to today. But we're not going to go into your life stories. We're instead going to go kind of into crisis management. How do two great leaders handle tragedy and crisis? So let's set the scene here. Summer of 2012. It's 6 months after Trayvon Martin was killed. The country is becoming more aware of violence against BIPOC folks. And we have two police shootings, actually 7 in 12 months in Anaheim, fatal police shootings. But on back-to-back nights, Manny Diaz and Joel Acevedo were killed. Manny was not found with a weapon on him. Joel was, although there's some dispute about that. But suddenly there's pretty massive protests breaking out on Anna Drive in Anaheim, and the young people and the mothers, and a lot of tension. And Mayor Tait, you are mayor at this time and your city's exploding. Can you take us back to that moment and what you were feeling and thinking?
Sure. You mentioned had served on the city council. I had from way back when, for about 10 years, was termed out in 2004. So I've been out of government for 6 years, and I ran for mayor in 2010, sworn in 2011. So relatively new mayor, and kind of, even though I had experience at City Hall, the experience was pretty old. And you mentioned the number of officer-involved shootings, and it was so Anaheim. I knew that wasn't typical, and there's not a lot of statistics on it, for oddly enough, but there were some, and it was way more than statistically normal. And gosh, it sounds like so clinical when I say it that way. Statistically, it was. Well, they say the city was simmering, and people were really questioning what's going on, including myself. And it's difficult when you're a mayor and you're trying to, because one side of you is heading an organization, which is city government, but your real job is representing the people, who and keeping and really holding city government accountable to the people. So there are different roles. And I'm starting to ramble, but it's bringing back a lot of emotion as when Manny Diaz was shot and the city erupted that night, actually. And so there isn't a playbook for that as mayor. But I knew that I want to, there's a term, running to the fire. I didn't want to, because no one, as mayor, you don't really know what's going on. Getting different reports filter up to you, but I want to get out and let the people know that I saw the video, because there's a video taken that night that went viral worldwide of kind of the aftermath of Manny Diaz shooting, and So I held a press conference the next day, and I said, we're going to seek the truth, and whatever it is, we're going to own it. And I asked for a review, which was controversial. I asked for a review by the Attorney General outside, because I knew there wasn't trust in the local DA, because normally these are decided by the district attorney, and I know there's a lot of, there wasn't trust. That's another story. But
let me freeze you one sec, Mayor, because I want to just get Mike's perspective, because I can hear, we can definitely get a snapshot of your emotion at that time, kind of shock and sadness and accountability. Right. And Mike, you're not yet superintendent. You're high up in the Anaheim schools at that time, but you're dealing with young people every day. What were you feeling and reacting in that summer of 2012?
Well, we were in a Gear Up conference in New York City, all the way across the country. And it was in the evening, and every TV screen was focused on Disneyland in Anaheim, and there were kids out in the streets. We had some teacher leaders came up to me and said, "These are our kids. What's going on?" And we found a sense of helplessness being so far off. And all of a sudden, all the national attention was what's happening in the shadow of the happiest place on earth. So we were in shock that this was happening. And but also knowing that there were a number of police killings, fatal killings. And so Thomas, I mean, the tension was very, very high, and the uncertainty was very. People just didn't know where to go. As Tom said, there's no map for this.
So it seems like there was two pivotal events that start to turn the situation around a little bit. Well, we should give credit to the organizers at that time, right? So I think it was Somos Anaheim was one of the groups, and there was the youth organizers out there. But Tom, in reading about this, it seems like there was a meeting at Anaheim High School, and then there was a meeting at the city council. Tell us about some of those, how you engaged the community, and what you heard from them that moved you to start taking some actions.
Well, I could talk about this for probably an hour or two. But I know there's also, it was very, I was invited back into that neighborhood, Anna Drive, which was this neighborhood where the Manny Diaz shooting happened. And it was, and the neighborhood invited me into, to talk to them. And I think I had some credibility in the neighborhood because we've been working in that neighborhood specifically. And I had taken an interest in it. And so, but that was a very interesting conversation because this was, I think it was on that following Wednesday, and the neighborhoods, it was still like the police weren't going into the neighborhood, but they invited me in, and they trusted me, which I really valued. And so I went in and I spent an hour, about 2 hours actually, with people in the neighborhood. Went into one of the apartments, and I heard stories of how, from parents, about how they were so fearful of their sons running from the police and getting shot. And it wasn't a fake fear. They were crying and shaking. So that's just something that was new to me. I didn't, I didn't look at the police that way from a fear base, but it was what a big part of our community did. And so I knew we had a big problem at that point. And so, and I really thought at that point, what do I do? And I thought, well, I ran on a platform of kindness, create a core value of kindness, which is helping others. No expectation return, just throwing it out there and helping others. I said, how would a city of kindness respond to this? And that's what led me. And the first thing was to listen. And that's because that's actually a kind act. It's respecting people who might have different opinions or whatever. So we had a big, we had a city council meeting that erupted in civil unrest, where we had to cancel the meeting, and it was crazy, kind of scary. And then we had a fall meeting at the high school because.
So, if I could jump in, Tom. So what happened? There was a groundswell of student voices that wanted to do something. They weren't sure what that would be, and it took a while for it to coalesce. And I think over several months, Tom, you and I and other teacher leaders were listening, right? And sort of a large-scale restorative practices, restorative circles, back and took us through the summer of 2013. And because by October, I think, of 2013, the students, during the summer, they decided to do the petition, a letter to the city council to bring schools and the city together to help with jobs, right?
Yeah. No, that's and it I think it led to that. And I remember I had meetings with the. I felt part of the core problem was you had these silos, and you had education silo, and you had business silo, you had government silo, and nonprofits, and the arts community, and no one was talking to each other, and no one was working together. And so I had meetings with each of those groups, leaders of each of those groups, brought them together in my office, said, okay, we got to work together. There's no reason why a school would have, close their gates afterwards, maybe for security reasons or things like that. There's a business. There's no connection between the business and schools, zero. And then the students got involved, and that's what Mike was referring to. And they came to city council meeting, and you mentioned Abel. It wasn't just Abel, like Mike said. It was a bunch of them. 200 showed up to council meeting, and they had a petition of 5,000 kids. So you get 5,000 people to sign anything, and 200 people show up to council meeting. It gets, I don't care who you are, it gets your attention. You got an issue.
Well, Tom, it got your attention because I remember we had prepped the students, and you were sincere about listening, but not only listening, but doing something. Because I said, maybe nothing happens, but it's more about them standing up and saying something. So I didn't want them to feel disappointed that if nothing did happen. I said something happened, and that's you guys taking ownership of this. But Tom, you were the one sitting at the room where it happens, right? And you listened, and you had the power of the mayor say, okay, we're gonna do something about this, something positive.
Before we jump to the positive educational story, I might get to that. I just kind of want to note that Tom is a fellow old white guy here, right? Is that you sort of had your George Floyd awakening 8 years before a lot of us white folks about police brutality and the reality of it for non-white communities, right? And it shook you up. And Antoine, I know it's a reality you grew up with from when you're a little kid in Chicago. You know about it, right? But it's us older, more privileged white folks. We woke up to it late. I just kind of want to note that's. But then you guys did some good stuff out of this. I'm not saying Anaheim's perfect now, right? But
just to put it in context, Brian, at that time, the big city mayors and big city superintendents were at odds from New York, Chicago, LA. They were not, as Tom said, they were completely siloed and operated separate. There was no communication, no trust, and people trying to take over each other. So I think that's another piece that happened I became superintendent in 2014. And that's really the time that the second piece, the rejuvenation out of trauma for a community really began.
And you have Michelle Alexander's book around this time talking about the school to prison pipeline, and then the activism that came out of trying to tear that down in the last 10 years. But Tom, tell us a little bit how you ended up building with Mike the a brand new AIM partnership. I think it's called the AIM program. And tell us about how that. I know there was a youth organizer named Abel Diaz. I've heard you guys talk about. Tell us a little bit about that story. How you built some positive programming off of youth input.
Well, when I first met Mike, I realized we had something really special here. This educator, soon to be superintendent, so there are silos, but boy, there needs to be superintendent and mayors that are open to working together and seeing the synergies when that happens. What can happen. So I mentioned these students came together and they said, we aren't happy with the way we're being educated, and we don't feel like we're ready for the jobs of the century, and it's more than taking a test. And they made that point really clear to me. And you think about it, it's like, boy, and I run a company too, and you want people who are critical thinkers and collaborators and communicators, and not someone who kind of could pick an A, B, C, or D on the test to when you want to work with people. So they came to the council and they said, we got this big problem and we need your help, but they didn't say what. And so I took it very seriously. I convened a group of business leaders and said, we're looking for ideas. And I just know that this idea of mentorship is just big. If somebody has a mentor, it could turn their life around. If it's going the wrong way. These kids in Anaheim, I think 90%, correct me if I'm wrong, I think about 90% of the kids qualify for free lunch. A lot of them are kids of immigrants. Parents may be working in a hotel industry, maybe cleaning rooms, and they have no idea what goes on in an office building or a studio or anything like that. And so if we could just connect with somebody, we had all these people coming to work, great people, and then all this was under an umbrella of kindness, and we explained it to that way to the business community. They were on board. I mean, not one person didn't want to do it that I approached, and of course, Mike put the whole thing together and figured out there's all sorts of ways to say no. Attorneys, liability, insurance, blah blah blah, blah blah blah, ton. And Mike just cut through all that crap. And you have to cut through all that crap to make something like this work. And we connected businesses and started this AIM program. And now I haven't been mayor for a while, but it's to prosper. I know. And Mike,
I think what we taught each other, because you are a successful businessman yourself, was the language of business and the language of schools, right? In order to communicate. We were speaking different languages, right? And you opened the door for us, and really, you had said, Mike, don't ask for money right now. It's about building trust, and ask for time, mentorship, mentoring, frame it in a way, and under the umbrella of kindness. It's going to be hard to say no. And I think, that really resonated with me. And then also pushing us, this big bureaucratic infrastructure, to get to yes internally, working the inside, right, and making that happen. Those first AIM experiences for our kids. Now it's grown to 90 corporate nonprofit partners, and it's one of the country's leaders in mentoring and internships as well. So
now, Mike, you became superintendent about 18 months, 2 years after this incident. But you put this AIM program together, and I know you well enough and have worked with you long enough to know that you have one of the leading districts in the whole country for preparing young people for both college and careers. And you've de-emphasized testing in favor of the 5 C's and 21st century skills. Tell us that journey of because it seems like that summer of 2012 and your relationship with the mayor then put you on a trajectory to transform Anaheim schools.
It's really the relationship with someone like Tom, because of otherwise the superintendent would not know how to approach businesses and corporations. We don't know how to cold call, right? And I've been asked this question so many times. You need sort of a mentor to bring you into that world, to coach you on how to address. And even with our students, our first cohort of students, we put a lot of our own skin in the game in terms of getting them ready for these internships. We have, teacher leaders that work with the kids. So we were trying to really ensure that there's success. And as Tom said, there were a lot of sort of, I think we shifted the corporate leaders' experiences too, because they were thinking more about philanthropy. We'll do something nice for these low-income kids. But now the same people I've talked to have said, oh my God, these kids are coming in with so many skills. They're so resilient. They're so grateful because we give them bus passes right through United Way and also partly through the city. We give them a little uniform, and then we have a lot of reflective practices, right? They're reflecting every day on their internships, and that's a huge thing because all of a sudden this corporate elite of Greater Anaheim is looking at our kids as assets, not deficits, right? Because that was the narrative up until all these shootings and everything like that, until Tom said, hey, wait a second. No, I'm going to go and listen and find out what's really going on. The narrative was this community is a deficit to Anaheim.
Mike, I just wanted to chime in really quick. I'm sorry if I want to cut you off. Brian mentioned the 5 C's. I thought that was really fascinating. Can you kind of break that down for me and for those who aren't familiar with that term?
Well, that is the language of business. It's what they call the soft skills. C stand for communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and the 5th C is compassion. Okay, it would have been a K for kindness, but we were like, you don't. These, right?
We have that running. We agree on most things except for that.
And Tom. The thing about kindness, right? People think, oh, well, that's just so soft, right? What is he? He's just a nice guy. But Tom has taught me that kindness is really about love, and love is about courage, doing the right thing. And that's one thing. When back before I became superintendent, we were watching the mayor's reaction. And what he described when he went into the barrio on a drive against the police chief's advice that this is dangerous, you represent the city. The story that got out was the mayor went there and he cried. He cried with the community. And that story, like ripples, right? All those came, and it came back to the kids who told their teachers, who told us about this is a different type of mayor.
Mike, you ran for office. I know you're in a nonpartisan position now, but you ran for office once as a Democrat. And Tom, you ran for office, I think, as a Republican, right? And you formed this deep friendship, or am I correct? Deep friendship and trust, which we just don't see today. How did that happen?
Well, it is nonpartisan. Thank God that these offices are. But still, of course, the parties get involved, and it's kind of, you pull back stuff. I suppose there's some if we take our eyes off the national news and get down to local level, it really, I found it doesn't really make much difference whether you're Republican or Democrat, because you got to solve problems, and you're looking for things that actually work. And I know I've changed my mind on things that I thought were pretty hard and fast, and I know Mike probably has, and some my closest ally on city council is been a very progressive Democrat, and we found ourselves just agreeing on almost everything. So it's kind of interesting, and I think again under that we start with kindness, which is a universal value. It's not a partisan value at all, and then it hits our humanity And I think that was also, to bring the community and the police department, that was a big issue. And it was about both sides understanding the humanity of the other. And the way people connect are through acts of kindness, actually. That's how people connect. And so that's, I know I'm digressing a little bit, but that's that. Like, if we could get at least one thing, is emphasizes that is the most key thing, is that idea of kindness, and have that as a core value. Then everything else, all this stuff came from that, from my perspective.
Antoine, I have a couple more questions, but you have a couple more. You want to, anything else you want to chime in?
No, I think the conversation, one, is refreshing to actually hear that a lot of what was going on here in Chicago obviously was going on all across the country, and being hearing from Mike and Tom about the whole aspect of just the emotional aspect of how young people dealt with what was going on with George Floyd in those cases, and it kind of really brought home a lot for me, because we kind of dealt with the same sort of situations here in Chicago. And the underlying theme with a lot of the young people, not only just a lot of the young people, but African Americans in low income neighborhoods, is being able to have that trust and that level of communication with police and that perception. And it's very eye-opening to hear from Tom that sitting with families, in their homes and in their environment, hearing their perception of how they view law enforcement as opposed to how he viewed it. And like, those are the type of conversations that need to be had all across this country, not only with politicians, but those that are in law enforcement, to really gauge and understand that level of fear, not only with, like I said, with young people, but just with African Americans in law enforcement, being able to change that perception. So I'm just taking it all in. This is very interesting.
Well, I think that's the heart of it, Antoine, is that we are in danger of losing an entire generation of young people who are losing trust in the very institution. I'm talking about, aside from the law enforcement and government, but public schools, right? The role of schools. And if we lose that, if they get lost in cynicism and they lose their hope, we are in big trouble, and they're going to be very vulnerable to the extremists out there, as we're seeing play out in places like Buffalo.
I heard a couple pieces of advice here. I think we'll end on the advice question for future leaders and future mayors and future superintendents. Tom, I think you said you chose to run towards the fire. Unfortunately, we're going to keep having crises in this country, in this world. What other advice do you have for trying to get through these crises in a way that builds healing and an authentic response, and not an artificial response to tragedy and injustice, right?
Yeah, I would. I kind of mentioned it, is ask yourself, how would imagine the city you want to live in, and for me, that is a city of kindness, where everyone's a little kinder to one another. And then ask that question, almost step outside yourself and say, how would a city of kindness respond to this situation, whatever it is? And that was my guiding force. That's why I ran for office, because I think that is, it's a different way of looking at the way we operate in government or society, and I think it's unifying, and it brings people together. It allows you to be open-minded to the other's humanity, and so I would say that's my advice, and it's very powerful. Mike and I went back and we had a meeting with the Dalai Lama back in India about this very topic. So he believes it's the path to world peace, and by creating a culture of kindness in their cities, but particularly schools. And in a generation we can do that, then we'll be world peace. So that's the advice I give.
Mike?
I think to follow up on kindness, Tom touched upon it, is the ability to listen to their stories. That is an act of kindness. And I think that there are so many kids who feel invisible in this world and ignored, and they all have very deep human stories that we need to prioritize in our system so we can better serve to serve them. And I think that we should not ever forget that it's we need to make education work for them rather than the other way around. And as long as we're rooted in kindness and compassion, we will get there, because it is about, as Tom said when he was running, it's not about 2 Anaheims, it's about 1. The kids are going to be our kids. They're going to be our employers as well as employees. They represent the future. And he always said it's 1 Anaheim. So, and I think that is the message to take, to other communities. And we see the struggle happening on a national level. And many of us in schools, and I'm sure cities, but definitely schools, we are bracing for a lot of divisiveness in this country playing out in the schools. So we need kindness, compassion, love more than ever.
That's a great note to close on. You can't have a better note than that. So thank you, Mayor Tait. Thank you, Superintendent Matsuda. Antoine and I are delighted to have talked to you.
Thank you. Real honor, Antoine. Pleasure meeting. Brian, pleasure meeting.
Absolutely.